Okay, today guys we're talking about multiplying integers. This is chapter 2, lesson 4. So multiplication is repeated addition, we all know that. So 3 times negative 40 really means that negative 40 is used as an add-in 3 separate times. So here we have negative 40, negative 40, and negative 40 all being added to each other is the same thing as saying 3 times negative 40, which will give us negative 120. Here they just illustrated on a number line for you, stating that they start at 0. Because we're adding negative 43 times, we're moving to the left 3 separate times, 40 units, which is still going to end up as our sum, which is negative 120. It says, by the commutative property of multiplication, 3 times negative 40 is the same thing as saying negative 40 times 3. This and other similar examples suggest the following rule for multiplying integers. So the product of two integers with different signs is going to be negative. Make sure you get that in your notes. Okay, so you have a negative here, and that's being multiplied by a positive 6. So your answer then is going to be negative 12. And likewise on the opposite side, a positive 2 and a negative 6 is going to give you a negative answer. Remember, this is when we are multiplying integers. So let's take a look here. Because I have a negative and I'm multiplying a positive by it, 3 times 12 is going to give us, let's see, 6 and 3. And a negative times a positive is a negative. So negative 36 would be our answer. Down here looking at B, I have a positive 4 and I'm multiplying a negative 7. Positive times a negative is a negative, and 4 times 7 is 28. On the next page it says the product of two integers is positive. What is the sign of the product of two negative integers? It says look at the pattern below. So here we've got our input. Our rule is times negative 5. So whatever input we're going to put in there, we're going to multiply it by negative 5. So if I input 2 right here, I can see that 2 times negative 5 gives me a negative. Positive times a negative gives me a negative. Same thing with 1 times a negative. Positive here times a negative gives me a negative 5. 0 times a negative, well, we know that multiplicative property of 0 tells us that any number multiplied by 0 gives us 0. Now we come here to negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 5. When we plug that into the rule there, a negative times a negative is going to give us a positive. Notice how on the right here, each product is 5 more than that previous product. And over here just states again that two negative factors equal a positive factor. So make sure you get this key concept down here written in your notes, that multiplying two integers with the same sign is going to give you a positive answer, and you can jot down those examples. We have a positive 4 times a positive 6, which gives us a positive number. Now, doesn't that make sense? We have two integers of the same sign creating a positive product. And again, here we have two integers which are negative of the same sign being multiplied together, which again give us a positive product. So looking at this next example here in A, it says negative 5 times negative 7. Well, because it's a negative times a negative, I know my answer has to be positive, and I know that 5 times 7 gives me 35. Over here on the right, I've got negative 8 times negative 14, a negative and a negative make a positive, so I know my answer is going to be positive, and 8 times 114 gives me 112. All right, on the next page here it says, an airplane descends at a rate of 175 feet per minute. So descends we know is going down, which would be negative. What is the airplane's change in altitude after 5 minutes? Okay, so here is per minute. You can see in the table you've got after 1 minute we're descending 175 feet. So let's talk about what that means. It says you need to find how many feet the airplane descended. And this is key right here because that's going to be your unit at the end. The plan that we're going to use to create our problem is the word descends means downwards, so the rate per minute is represented by negative 175. Here they've created that function table that shows that for every minute that passes, we're going to decrease or descend more by another 175 feet. You could also multiply 5 and negative 175 to find the change in altitude after 5 minutes, okay, because each minute is 1, and so 5 minutes would be 5. So to solve that, we've got 5 times negative 175, and if you multiply those together, remember we have a positive integer and we're multiplying a negative integer, and a positive and a negative together equal a negative, so my answer is negative 875. And don't forget your unit here. They're asking you what is the airplane's change in altitude. Altitude was measured in feet. And here to check really quick, you know that 5 times negative 200 is negative 1,000. So you know that it has to be close because negative 875 is close to negative 1,000. All right, next slide says use the commutative and associative properties of multiplication to multiply more than 2 integers. So in the first method here, we have negative 4 times 12 times negative 5, and we're going to use that associative property to rearrange what is in parentheses. So let's go ahead and do that. We put negative 4 and negative 12 in brackets here, as you can see, and a negative times a positive gives us a negative. So we will be left with negative 4 times 12 gives us negative 48. Now we need to take negative 48 and multiply that by negative 5. Remember, a negative and a negative multiplied together is going to give you a positive, and negative 48 times negative 5 gives you 240. Down here, looking at the commutative property, we have, again, the same problem, negative 4 times 12 times negative 5. But here we're just going to rearrange things, okay? So now I can go ahead and do my multiplication from left to right. And I've got a negative times a negative, which is going to give me a positive. And 5 times 4 gives me 20. So I have positive 20 times a positive 12. And 20 times 12, again, gives us 240. So 2 different ways that you can rearrange those expressions to find the product, okay? All right, then the next thing we're going to talk about is using the rules for multiplying integers to simplify and evaluate algebraic expressions. So when you simplify algebraic expressions, it is the simplest form that that expression can be in. So any variables that can be combined or multiplied together need to be multiplied together. Any numbers or integers that need to be combined need to be multiplied together. So in this particular case, we can see that they just really understand right now that this is the same thing as saying this. They're just separating each one of those variables and those integers by parentheses, indicating multiplication there, okay? The next step then would be to use that associative property of multiplication and rearrange your expression so that way you're multiplying your integers together first. We know that a negative and a positive together really equal a negative, and I know that I can multiply a times b and have that represented as a b, okay? So negative 7 times a positive 4 gives me a negative 28, and I know a times b can be represented as ab. So negative 28 ab is my answer. On the last slide here, just evaluating these algebraic expressions, you're going to use substitution and just plug in the values that they give you for those variables. So I really have 3 times 2 times, and y is negative 6. All I did was I plugged in for x and y. Okay. The next thing that I want to do is just use that associative property and understand it's going to be easier for me to put brackets around here because following the order of operations in PEMDAS, I do everything in parentheses first. So it just makes sense to know that a positive and a positive together make a positive. So I have 3 times 2, which is 6, and I have to multiply that now by a negative 6. Always make sure that you're carrying the rest of that expression down. The longer those expressions get and the more difficult they are, it's going to be easier for you to not forget about anything. Then I've got a positive multiplied by a negative, which we know equals a negative, and 6 times 6 gives us 36. So here, it just kind of shows you exactly what I just did. And you can come to class with any questions.